I heard the old screen door creak behind me as my wife whispered promises to another man. Still, my hand stayed steady on the railing we once built together. As that creak drifted through the hallway, it carried the truth of what our marriage had really become. While the sound lingered, I felt years of loyalty shrinking down to a single, painful breath. The same creak that once meant she was home now told me she'd left us long before today. That's when I decided a husband's justice arrives quietly the moment he stops pretending he's loved. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. For 6 years, Howard Langley's mornings began before the sun even thought about rising. He would wake to the soft creak of the farmhouse settling in the cold, the same way it always had, long before Laura's accident. But everything after that creak, every step, every breath had changed. He dressed quietly, pulling on the same worn flannel shirt, bracing his stiff back with a slow exhale before walking toward the bedroom where his wife lay. The door hinged open with a whisper, revealing Laura exactly as he had left her the night before, motionless from the waist down, arms folded lightly across a blanket he tucked around her every evening. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard him, and for a moment there was something like softness there, but it disappeared quickly under the weight of expectation. Howard began the familiar ritual. He slid his arms beneath her, lifting her carefully, steadily, even as the strain pulled at every tendon in his shoulders. Laura weighed more than she looked, dead weight always did. He carried her to the bathroom, supporting her as he cleaned her, dressed her, brushed her hair the way she liked. He spoke gently, filling the silence with small reassurances. Some mornings she thanked him, more often she didn't. It didn't matter to him. This was marriage. This was what he had promised. Breakfast followed the same rhythm. Howard fed her slowly, matching the pace she insisted on, wiping crumbs from her chin, adjusting pillows so she wouldn't feel twisted. She couldn't move from the waist down, not even a twitch, not even the slightest involuntary shift. At least, that's what he believed with absolute conviction for 6 long years. He never questioned the odd little things, the moments he thought he saw her shift slightly, the way she sometimes found an oddly comfortable position even after he left her sitting stiffly. He told himself he imagined it. He always gave her the benefit of the doubt. But the years carved themselves into his body. The ache in his back had grown sharp and unforgiving, a constant reminder that age didn't care about devotion. His hands trembled now, especially in the mornings when the cold seeped into his bones. Still, he kept going. He moved slowly, deliberately, refusing to let Laura see his pain. He didn't want her to feel guilty, not that she ever expressed much concern. She liked things a certain way, and Howard did his best to keep up. Every week or so, Emily stopped by. She brought groceries, helped clean, tried to take some weight off her father's shoulders. She was 38, practical and kind in a way her mother never fully appreciated. When Emily watched her father shuffle across the room, shoulders hunched, face pale with exhaustion, concern always flickered across her features. She would pull him aside, whisper in the hallway, "Dad, this is killing you. You can't keep doing everything alone." But Howard only smiled and patted her hand. "Your mother needs me," he'd say. "It's my duty." Laura didn't like those conversations. She would call out from the next room, her voice sharp and needy, "Howard, where did you go? I can't be left like this." The guilt cut into him every time. Emily's eyes would narrow, frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior, but she kept her thoughts to herself for his sake. It wasn't that Laura shouted or belittled him. Her power was subtler, woven into sighs and quivering tones, gentle reminders that she was helpless without him. If he stepped outside for even an hour, to fix a fence, buy supplies, breathe fresh air, she would say, "I thought something happened to you. I was scared. You know I can't do anything on my own." That sentence alone kept him home most days. Howard told himself this was love. This was obligation. This was what a husband did. You cared for the person you vowed to protect. You stayed even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And for 6 years, that belief shaped every waking moment of his life. But then came the slowing. Laura began complaining of numbness spreading higher, unusual spasms she claimed to feel even though she was supposedly paralyzed. Her stories shifted slightly from day to day. Some mornings she said she couldn't feel her fingertips. Other mornings she said her shoulders burned like fire. None of it made sense to him, but he didn't have the medical knowledge to question her. What he did have was concern, a rising, gnawing worry that something worse was happening. So for the first time in years, Howard made a decision for himself. He scheduled an appointment with a neurologist in the county, someone new, someone with more experience. Laura protested, softly at first, then with tears and trembling words, but he didn't bend this time. Something wasn't right. And as he confirmed the appointment over the phone, he had no idea that this single choice, this tiny act of courage, would begin unraveling the life he thought he understood. A life built on devotion. A life built on sacrifice. A life built, he would soon learn, on a lie. The specialist clinic didn't look like much from the outside, just a low brick building beside a parking lot with cracked asphalt. But inside, everything felt sharper, more purposeful. Howard wheeled Laura through the hallway, the scent of antiseptic mingling with the soft hum of fluorescent lights. He clutched his old brown hat in both hands, twisting the brim until it warped. He had brought Laura to doctors before, many in fact, but none had ever given him more than sympathetic smiles or vague reassurances. He expected the same today, hoped for clarity maybe, but certainty, no. After 6 years, certainty felt like a luxury he no longer deserved. Dr. Min Carter entered the exam room without fanfare. She was calm, efficient, her eyes focused and alert in a way that made Howard straighten instinctively. She greeted him politely, then turned her full attention to Laura. "Let's start with some basic neurological tests," she said, her tone neutral but attentive. Howard watched her every move, watched the way she tapped reflex hammers against tendons, shined lights across pupils, pressed fingers against muscles. But something was off. With each test, Dr. Min's brows tightened slightly, just enough for Howard to notice. Laura, meanwhile, was dramatic in her responses. When asked if she could feel pressure, she winced before Dr. Min's hand even touched her leg. When asked about tingling, she moaned softly as though in great distress. Howard felt a pang of guilt watching her suffer, or what he thought was suffering. Yet beneath that, a flicker of confusion stirred. Her reactions didn't match what he had seen at home. They seemed bigger, more rehearsed, as if she were performing for someone. Dr. Min didn't comment, but her posture grew more rigid with every test. She moved through the examination slowly, deliberately, repeating certain steps, measuring responses with a precision that suggested something wasn't lining up. Howard's grip on his hat tightened until his knuckles turned white. He tried to read her expression, but she kept it carefully neutral. "Howard," she said finally, her voice soft, "would you mind stepping outside for just a moment? I want to ask Laura a few questions privately." He hesitated. Laura hated when he left her, but Dr. Min's request carried a calm authority that made refusal feel impossible. Laura's eyes darted to him with a look he couldn't interpret. Fear, anger, something else. He swallowed hard and stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. He stood there alone, hat pressed to his chest, listening to the distant murmur of voices through the thin wall. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard tones, Laura's defensive, Dr. Min's patient but firm. The longer he waited, the more his stomach twisted into knots. After several minutes, the door opened. Dr. Min didn't invite him back into the room. Instead, she stepped into the hallway with him and gently closed the door behind her. Her expression had changed entirely. The calm professionalism was still there, but beneath it pulsed something sharper, urgency, concern, maybe even alarm. Howard felt his heartbeat quicken. "Doctor," he asked, barely above a whisper. "Mr. Langley," she said, choosing her words with deliberate care, "I need you to listen closely. Something is very wrong here." He nodded, waiting for the medical diagnosis he'd been fearing for months, maybe years. something degenerative, something irreversible, something that meant he was losing her for real this time. But instead she continued, not medically, legally. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Legally, he repeated, as if the word itself were foreign. Dr. Min folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. Your wife's neurological responses don't match her reported symptoms. She is showing signs of voluntary muscle control, control she is intentionally suppressing. She paused, letting the sentence land. In simple terms, the paralysis she describes does not appear genuine. Howard's breath caught. No, doctor, she hasn't walked in 6 years. I've carried her. I've fed her. I'm not saying this easily, Dr. Min interrupted gently. But the inconsistencies are significant, too significant to ignore. Her voice lowered even further. Mr. Langley, I believe you may be the victim of deception, possibly fraud. A buzzing filled his ears, drowning out the sounds of the clinic, drowning out everything except the sick, twisting disbelief spiraling through his chest. Fraud, deception, Laura. No, he wanted to laugh, to protest, to storm back into the room and deny the accusation outright. But the seriousness in Dr. Min's eyes stole the words from his throat. She placed a steady hand on his arm. You need to call the police. Howard stared at her, unable to move, unable to breathe, the hallway around him blurring at the edges. Call the police on his wife. Before he could speak, before he could even begin to grasp what she was saying, the exam room door creaked behind them. And Howard realized, for the first time, that his entire world might be built on something far more fragile than he ever imagined. Howard didn't respond at first. The words fraud and deception didn't belong in the same sentence as his wife's name. He just stood there in the narrow hallway, staring at Dr. Min as though she had spoken in another language. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. For 6 years, his entire world had revolved around caring for Laura, feeding her, lifting her, washing her, comforting her through tears and sleepless nights. He knew every freckle on her back, every medication she took, every trembling breath she claimed she couldn't control. And now this doctor was telling him that none of it was real. Dr. Min softened her voice but not her message. Mr. Langley, I didn't want to say anything until I ran enough tests to be sure, but your wife's reactions don't align with paralysis. In several reflex exams, I observed micro-movements, tiny contractions in her leg muscles that she attempted to hide. Howard blinked slowly, confused. Micro-movements. Yes, she said, voluntary ones, which means she has more physical capability than she claims. She let out a breath, looking troubled. This isn't consistent with someone who's been paralyzed for years. Her body simply doesn't match the story. The buzzing returned to Howard's ears, louder this time. His hands trembled around the brim of his hat. No, doctor, you don't understand. I saw her fall. I saw her lying there, screaming she couldn't feel her legs. I carried her to the truck myself. She hasn't taken a single step since. Dr. Min held his gaze. Trauma can look convincing. Panic can mimic neurological symptoms. But after 6 years, if she were truly paralyzed, her muscles would have severe atrophy. They don't. She paused, then added with clinical precision. Someone maintaining total immobility for years would have far more degradation. She does not. Howard shook his head hard, as if trying to rattle loose the thought. You're saying she's faking. That's impossible. She wouldn't, she could. His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. I'm not accusing blindly, Dr. Min said. I suspect malingering, intentional deception for personal gain. Sometimes it's for care, sometimes for financial benefits, sometimes for emotional control. She watched him closely. Has there been insurance involvement since the accident? Howard felt something cold slide down his spine. There were disability claims, payouts, adjustments every year, but that was because she needed them. I never questioned it. Why would I? Dr. Min's expression told him why. He leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. His mind raced back through years of memories, moments when Laura refused certain treatments, when she resisted physical therapy, when she cried at the suggestion of independent mobility testing. He remembered her tension, her fear, the way she'd cling to him whenever a doctor asked too many questions. He had always thought she was fragile, terrified, broken. What if she was simply protecting the lie? No, he whispered, refusing it. You didn't see her after the fall. She wouldn't pretend something like this. Not to me, not for 6 years. Dr. Min let him speak, let him resist, let the storm roll through him. When his breathing finally steadied, she said quietly, I think you should review her original hospital reports and any follow-up evaluations. Look for inconsistencies, missing pages, notes that don't align with what you were told. Howard stared at her, stunned. Why would there be missing pages? That's what I want you to find out, she replied. Behind them, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emily turned the corner, carrying her purse and paperwork she had been filling out at the front desk. She stopped short when she saw the look on her father's face. Dad, what happened? Dr. Min didn't sugarcoat it. Your mother's condition does not appear consistent with paralysis. There are signs of deliberate manipulation. Emily froze as if struck. Her lips parted but no words came. Slowly, color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a deep sh. Aching anger. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. All these years, all the pressure she put on him. Her eyes welled, but she forced the tears back. Howard couldn't speak. The hallway felt smaller now, the air too thin. He reached for the wall again to steady himself, his voice a rasping whisper. If she's not paralyzed, he swallowed hard, feeling something inside him crack open. Then what have I been doing? What have I been living for? Emily stepped closer, her hand hovering near his arm, uncertain whether he could bear to be touched. Dr. Min stood with quiet patience, giving him space but not letting him drift into denial. She will need further evaluation, the doctor said calmly. But Mr. Langley, you must prepare yourself. What comes next may be difficult. Howard didn't answer. He couldn't. His world felt suddenly unstable, like the floor had shifted under him without warning. 6 years of sacrifice, exhaustion, devotion, reframed in a single afternoon. And as he stood there, trembling, the exam room door cracked open from inside. Howard turned slowly, bracing himself, though he didn't yet know for what. The drive home felt longer than usual, the road stretching endlessly across the flat fields of rural Ohio. Howard didn't speak, didn't turn on the radio, didn't even glance at the scenery he'd known his whole life. His thoughts were too loud, buzzing, replaying Dr. Min's words on a loop he couldn't escape. Signs of voluntary muscle use, potential deception, legal concerns. By the time he reached the farmhouse, his hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't the cold. It was fear, or suspicion, or something darker he didn't want to name. Emily followed him inside, watching over him the way she used to watch over her son when he was small, carefully, worried he might fall. Dad, she said gently, we should start with the old medical records, everything from the night of her fall. We need to see what's there. Howard didn't want to. Every instinct in him screamed to leave the past alone, to cling to the version of events he had lived with for years. But another part of him, smaller, quieter, and newly awakened, needed answers, needed truth. He fetched the worn accordion folder from the top shelf of the hall closet, the place where he'd stored all Laura's documents since the accident. Dust coated the edges. He set the folder on the kitchen table, hands hesitant, as if touching it might confirm a reality he couldn't bear. Emily pulled out the first stack of papers. These are the ER intake forms, she said, frowning as she flipped through them. Dad, some pages are missing. Howard leaned closer. Missing? What do you mean missing? Look, she held up a packet where page 3 simply wasn't there. No tear, no crease, no explanation. Just gone. He scanned the remaining pages and his stomach tightened. Dates didn't line up. Several forms had signatures that didn't look like any doctor he remembered. One even had Laura's name scribbled in handwriting he didn't recognize, slanted, rushed, nothing like the neat loops she'd always used. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. Insurance claim forms were tucked between medical notes, some stamped with approvals he didn't remember authorizing. Emily paused when she reached the yearly payout summaries. She read in silence for a long moment, her face tightening with each line. "Dad," she finally whispered, "the disability payments, they increased every single year. And Mom," she signed requests for adjustments based on worsening symptoms. Howard blinked hard. "Emily, I never saw those forms. I never heard about any adjustments." "That's the problem," she said quietly. "Someone did." He rubbed his hands over his face. The house felt colder now, heavier. He flipped to another report, one labeled Neurological Assessment, Day 2. Halfway down the page, a single line jumped out at him. "Patient-resisted MRI. States she is unable to tolerate movement." Emily read it too. "Wait, Dad, was she unconscious when you brought her in?" "Yes," he said, the words scraping out of him. "She passed out in the truck. She didn't wake up until they had her in a bed." "Then how could she resist anything?" Howard stared at the sentence until the letters blurred. His heartbeat thudded dully in his ears. Suddenly the contradictions began to pile in his mind, uninvited and undeniable. The day after the accident, she had insisted she couldn't feel her legs. She cried endlessly. She refused certain treatments, dismissing them as too painful or too dangerous. And he had believed her, every word, every tear. A memory surfaced, slow and unwelcome. 2 years ago, he had suggested trying physical therapy again, just light exercises, maybe to prevent muscle shrinkage. Laura had snapped at him, her voice slicing through the house like broken glass. "Do you think I'm lying? Do you think I want to be like this?" She decried for an hour afterward, accusing him of abando, ning her emotionally, of doubting her suffering. He remembered apologizing again and again. He remembered promising never to bring it up. Now that moment replayed in a new light, and the realization tasted bitter. Emily watched him, her voice softening. "Dad, I think she kept you from seeing things. She controlled what information reached you." Howard pressed a hand to his forehead. "I took care of her every day. I thought I was helping. God, if she's not paralyzed, then what was all of this?" He stood slowly from the table, as though rising from the weight of 100 invisible bricks. His back ached, but the pain felt different now. Less physical, more symbolic. A reminder of the years he'd carried something he never should have had to. Emily stepped toward him, ready to guide him back to the chair, but he raised a hand gently. "No, I'm all right. I need to understand what happened that day. The day she fell." He walked to the window and stared out at the gray shed at the edge of their property, the place where his life changed 6 years ago. The place he never questioned. "I need to go back there," he said quietly. "I need to see it with new eyes." His voice trembled, not from age but from something far more painful. And as he reached for his jacket, the kitchen felt colder still. Because for the first time, Howard understood that the truth might not just hurt. It might undo everything he thought he knew. The shed looked different now. Howard had walked past it thousands of times since Laura's accident, mowed around it, repaired loose siding, even repainted the door once. But he had never really looked at it. Not the way he looked at it now, with suspicion creeping along his spine like cold fingers. The early afternoon light slanted across the roof, catching in the dust and cobwebs that clung to the corners. It felt like the place was holding its breath. He stepped inside slowly, the old wooden boards groaning under his weight. The smell of oil, soil, and aging lumber filled the air. Tools hung neatly where he'd always kept them. Nothing had changed. Nothing except his understanding of what happened here. His eyes drifted to the ladder, the one she claimed had slipped from under her, sending her tumbling to the ground. He knelt beside it, gripping the rails. The wood was thick, solid, reinforced with metal brackets he'd installed himself years before. It didn't wobble. It didn't lean. It didn't bow. Even at 70, he knew he could climb it safely. "How did you fall from this?" he whispered, confusion twisting into something heavier. He positioned the ladder exactly where she had said it had been. He pressed on the rungs, tested the tilt, even pushed hard enough to make it shift. It wouldn't budge. Not easily. Not accidentally. Not the way she described through sobs 6 years ago, insisting the wood just gave out beneath her. Howard felt the first punch of dread. Her story didn't add up, not even close. He stood there staring at the ground where he once found her, crying, writhing, saying she couldn't move her legs. He remembered how pale she looked, how terrified, how urgent everything felt. He remembered carrying her to the truck, her breath hitching, her hands clawing his shirt. Now standing in the same spot, the scene felt rehearsed, orchestrated. His chest tightened. Footsteps crunched in the gravel outside. Howard turned sharply, startled. At the edge of the property line stood Tom Weaver, his longtime neighbor, a man with weathered skin, a slouched posture, and eyes that avoided direct confrontation whenever possible. He removed his cap and held it awkwardly against his chest. "Tom," Howard asked, "you all right?" Tom hesitated, shifting his weight. "Saw you heading to the shed, wasn't sure if I should come over." Howard nodded slowly. "Something wrong?" A long pause stretched between them, thick with unspoken worry. Finally Tom exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Howard, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago." Howard stepped closer, heart pounding. "What is it?" Tom looked toward the ground, then back at the shed. "The night Laura got hurt, I was out feeding my dogs late, around 10:30. You told everyone you found her around 10, right?" "Yes," Howard said cautiously, "right after I heard her scream." Tom swallowed hard. "Well, I saw her after that, walking." The word hit Howard like a punch to the ribs. Tom continued quickly, as if afraid he'd lose his nerve. "She was out by the edge of your property, walking clear as day. She didn't look hurt. She didn't look scared, just walking. I even raised a hand to say hello, but she didn't see me." Howard felt his world tilt. "Tom, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" Tom nodded, guilt etched deep into his face. "I should have told you, but I figured maybe I saw wrong, or maybe you two had already talked about it. Then time passed and I didn't want to stir anything up." He looked away, voice cracking. "But hearing all that ruckus earlier, Emily yelling, you tearing out of the driveway, I realized something must be happening." Howard stepped back, gripping the shed doorframe to steady himself. Walking. Laura had been walking after her supposed fall. His mind reeled, rewriting 6 years of caretaking in a single shattering moment. The lifting, washing, feeding, carrying, every ache in his bones suddenly felt like part of someone else's design. He had cared for a lie. Emily appeared at the top of the hill, breathless from jogging across the yard. She caught sight of Howard's expression and Tom's lowered head, and her face hardened. "Dad, what happened?" Tom repeated his confession. Emily listened silently, jaw tightening with every word. When he finished, she turned to her father, her voice low but firm. "Dad, we have to go to the police. This isn't a misunderstanding anymore. This is deliberate." Howard didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was still trapped in that moment 6 years ago, replaying what he thought he saw, what he thought he heard, what he thought he knew. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Not yet." Emily frowned. "Dad." He raised a trembling hand. "No, if she faked this, if she manipulated all of us for 6 years, then I need proof. Real proof, patterns, records, something undeniable." He looked back into the shed, the truth settling like dust on every surface. "I won't go to the police until I have everything." Tom stepped away quietly, giving father and daughter space. Emily touched Howard's arm gently. "Then where do we start?" Howard stared at the ladder, at the lie he once believed without question. "We start," he said, voice hollow but steady, "by uncovering everything she hid." And as they stepped out of the shed, The air felt colder, sharper, like the beginning of a truth that would cost him far more than he knew. Howard didn't sleep the night after speaking with Tom Weaver. He lay awake in the dark farmhouse, listening to the groans of aging wood and the distant hum of cicadas, trying to make sense of a reality he no longer trusted. The woman he had cared for, lifted, washed, and protected for 6 relentless years. Had she really walked away from her accident without injury? Had she truly orchestrated every ounce of his grief and exhaustion? By morning, one thing was clear. He needed professional help, not from a doctor. From someone who understood documents, signatures, money, lies. So he drove to attorney Paul Whitman's office. Paul had been Howard's lawyer for decades, handled the sale of his machining business, helped with small disputes, even advised him after his wife fell. The man was steady, unshakable, with wide shoulders, and a voice roughened by years of courtroom arguments. When Howard stepped into the office, Paul set aside his glasses immediately. "You look like hell," Paul said bluntly. "Sit, tell me everything." Howard did. He told him about Dr. Min, about Laura's suspicious test results, about the missing hospital pages, and finally about Tom Weaver's confession. With each detail, Paul's expression hardened. By the time Howard finished, the attorney's pen lay still on the desk, untouched. "All right," Paul said after a long silence. "Let's look into the financial side. Lies that big, they usually leave a trail." Paul turned to his computer, typing with surprising speed for a man his age. He accessed databases Howard didn't know existed, cross-referencing names, insurance records, and past transactions. The office was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the soft clicking of keys. Then Paul froze. "Howard," he said slowly, "did you know your wife opened bank accounts under her maiden name?" The words didn't land at first. Howard blinked, trying to understand. "Her maiden name? No, she hasn't used that in decades." "Well, she used it plenty the last 6 years." Paul rotated the screen toward him. 2 checking accounts, 1 savings, all opened right after her accident. Howard leaned in, staring at the unfamiliar documents. The signature was hers, there was no question, but the name printed above it belonged to a woman he no longer recognized. "Why would she hide these from me?" Howard whispered. Paul didn't answer. He clicked into the transaction history. Rows of deposits filled the screen: insurance payouts, disability increases, adjustments, lump sums. All money Howard assumed went toward medical equipment, specialist visits, home care necessities. Except the balances didn't match what he remembered, not even close. "She diverted the money," Paul said, voice heavy. "Moved it in increments, just small enough to avoid drawing attention." Howard felt his throat close. Diverted to what? Paul clicked another tab, highlighting a recurring transfer. Here, monthly payments to a man named Richard Hale. Howard stared. The name meant nothing until it suddenly did. His stomach dropped. Richard, a man Laura once dated before they married, a name she never spoke, not even in passing, but he remembered it, heard it once in an old argument years ago. Someone she had called a mistake, someone she swore she'd never see again. Paul watched Howard's face fall. "You know him?" "He was an old flame, a bad memory," she said. Howard swallowed hard. Why would she be paying him? Paul leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Howard, this isn't simple manipulation anymore. This is bigger than deceit. It's fraud, financial, medical, possibly criminal conspiracy." The room spun for a moment. Howard gripped the arms of his chair, trying to steady himself. Fraud. The word echoed like a hammer strike. He had loved her, cared for her, sacrificed nearly every ounce of strength he had left. And while he broke his back lifting her, she had siphoned money behind his back, money meant for her care, money he believed was keeping her alive. A tremor passed through him, a mix of heartbreak and rage so deep it felt like a second heartbeat. Paul spoke gently now. "Howard, I need you to start documenting everything. Dates, behaviors, financial statements, medical reports, anything you can recall. If this goes to court, and it likely will, you'll need a complete record. Howard nodded slowly. He didn't trust his voice. The betrayal sat so deep in his chest it felt like a physical wound. Paul slid a notebook across the desk. Start here, write down everything, even the small things. Howard opened the first page with unsteady hands. Lines blurred until he blinked the tears away. His pen hovered, then dropped to the paper. He wrote the first sentence. 6 years ago my wife fell, or at least, she told me she did. Paul placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise. Howard closed the notebook but didn't stand yet. He needed a moment, needed to gather the pieces of a reality that no longer resembled his own. Outside, the wind rattled the office windows, carrying the faint sound of a siren miles away. And as Howard finally rose to leave, the notebook tucked under his arm, one thought echoed louder than the rest. If Laura had lied about money, what else was she hiding? Howard installed the cameras the same way he had done everything else these past 6 years, quietly, carefully, with no thought of himself. He waited until Laura was napping in the living room recliner, her eyes closed, her breathing even. He moved through the house with the same practiced gentleness he used when adjusting her blankets. But this time, every step carried a tremor of dread. He placed one camera high on the bookshelf, angled toward the recliner and the hallway. Another in the kitchen, tucked behind a jar of flour. A third near the bedroom doorway. Small, discreet, silent. Technology he never imagined he would bring into his marriage. But necessity had replaced trust, and he hated how easily he'd learned to doubt the woman he once believed incapable of deception. As he worked, he kept glancing at Laura, half expecting her to crack open an eye and see the truth. But she didn't. She lay as she always did, still, helpless, fragile. Watching her now felt like looking at a stranger pretending to be his wife. In the evenings that followed, nothing changed. Laura complained of pain when he moved her. She asked for water, asked for blankets, asked why he seemed distracted lately. She even cried once, telling him she felt he was pulling away, that she didn't know what she'd do if he ever stopped caring for her. The guilt almost broke him. Almost. But every night before bed, Howard checked the recordings. And every night the footage showed nothing more than what he'd seen with his own eyes. Laura motionless, Laura dependent, Laura trapped in a body that refused to move. Days passed, then a week. Howard's hope and dread became indistinguishable from each other. Then came the night that changed everything. It was after midnight when Howard woke with a start, unsure what had pulled him from sleep. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses on the eardrums. Emily, who had insisted on sleeping in the guest room just for a few days, sat up when she heard him shuffle to the living room. "Dad," she whispered, rubbing her eyes, checking the cameras again. He nodded wordlessly. He pulled up the live feed and froze. There in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Laura wasn't in her recliner. The blanket lay crumpled on the floor. The chair rocked slightly, as if recently vacated. Emily leaned forward, breath caught. "Dad, where is she?" Howard replayed the footage. His hands shook violently, but he forced himself to watch. It began around 12:14 a.m. Laura, his paralyzed wife, shifted, not a twitch, a movement. She rolled to the side, planted her feet on the floor, and pushed herself up with steady strength, not hesitation, not difficulty. She stood. Howard's stomach dropped so hard he felt nauseous. They watched her stretch her arms, her back arching easily, as if releasing stiffness from a normal day of walking, not after 6 years of immobility. She moved with the casual grace of someone who had been standing all her life, someone who had never needed him to lift her, feed her, wash her. Emily covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God, she can move, she can walk." Her voice crumpled as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Dad, she's been lying to you, for years." Howard said nothing. He couldn't. His heart felt like it was splitting open inside his chest, tearing along the seams of every me. More he'd ever held of her. He forced himself to keep watching. On the screen, Laura walked into the kitchen. She opened the fridge with ease, took out a bottle of water and drank deeply. Then she leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, her posture relaxed, even bored. She looked like a woman enjoying a moment of solitude, not someone imprisoned by her body. Howard exhaled a sound he didn't recognize. A low, broken noise pulled from somewhere hollow and devastated. 6 years of pain rolled through him in a tidal wave. The nights he cried quietly from exhaustion, the mornings his back locked up, the guilt she poured on him when he left her side for even an hour, all of it twisted into something cruel and unbearable. Emily's tears turned to shaking anger. "She used you," she whispered. "She used your kindness, your loyalty, Dad. She stole your life." Howard pressed trembling fingers to his forehead. The woman he had loved had orchestrated his suffering with precision. She had watched him break himself for her, and she had let him. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to breathe through the crushing truth. When he opened them, the footage still played. Laura walking back to the recliner, settling into position, arranging herself exactly as he'd left her before bedtime. She even practiced a weak, helpless look in the direction of the hallway. The performance was flawless. Howard didn't wait to see more. He picked up the phone. Dr. Min answered on the second ring, her voice calm but alert. As he explained what he'd seen, she grew quiet, then firm. "Howard, I need you to forward that footage immediately," she said. "Do not confront her. I'm contacting Detective Cole." Howard lowered the phone slowly, the weight of her words sinking deep. Detective Cole. This was no longer suspicion. No longer confusion. This was a crime. And the truth, undeniable, ruthless, was finally stepping into the light. Detective Ryan Cole arrived at the farmhouse just after sunrise, his unmarked sedan crunching across the gravel drive. He stepped out with a leather folder tucked under his arm, scanning the property with a practiced investigator's eye. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with the calm, steady presence of someone who had seen the worst in people and learned never to rush to judgment. But when he saw the strain on Howard's face, the exhaustion, the betrayal etched into every line, his expression softened. Inside the living room, Howard sat in the same chair from which he'd watched Laura walk across the house like nothing was ever wrong. Emily stayed close, ready to fill in anything her father couldn't bring himself to say. Cole set a recorder on the coffee table, clicked it on, and said gently, "Howard, I need you to walk me through the last 6 years. Everything from the fall to now." Howard took a breath that trembled on the way out. 6 years ago, she screamed from the shed. "I found her on the ground saying she couldn't feel her legs. I carried her to the truck. I believed her. I never questioned a thing, not for a moment." Cole leaned forward. "Did anything about her behavior strike you as unusual over the years? Anything that felt inconsistent?" The question cut deep. Howard stared at his hands. "She never wanted physical therapy, refused it, said it made things worse. If I suggested she try moving even a little, she'd cry or say I didn't love her enough to accept her condition." He swallowed, his voice thinning. "She made me feel guilty any time I left her alone. Said she was scared, that she depended on me. Most days I barely stepped outside." Emily clenched her jaw. She isolated him, controlled everything. Cole nodded slowly. "Emotional blackmail, it fits the pattern in long-term deception cases." He tapped his pen against the folder. "But to maintain the illusion physically, that takes discipline. She would have had to suppress natural reflexes around doctors, keep her muscles working just enough in secret to avoid total atrophy but still appear helpless." He shook his head. "It's rare and deliberate." Howard felt a chill run through him. "She fooled me completely." "You trusted her," Cole said. "That's not the same thing as being foolish." But the reassurance did little to ease the sting. For 6 years, Howard had lived a version of reality curated by manipulation. Every whispered plea, every fearful look, every accusation when he tried to step away, all of it now appeared as part of a pattern he had been too kind, too loyal to recognize. Cole opened the folder and slid a notepad toward him. "We're building a timeline. The more precise you can be, the stronger the case becomes. Dates of major changes in her behavior, when she refused treatment, when finances shifted, when emotional pressure increased." Howard began explaining everything he could remember. The early months when he believed recovery was possible, the sudden shift to complete dependency, the nights she insisted he carry or even when it strained his back, the guilt-laden stories she repeated whenever he tried to leave the house for errands. As he spoke, he realized just how many moments should have raised questions. When the interview ended, Cole turned to Emily. "I need copies of every financial statement, every medical record, every insurance form you found." And Howard, he met the older man's gaze with a seriousness that made the room tighten. "We need airtight evidence, not suspicion, not emotion, proof. Without it, this will fall apart." Howard nodded. He understood. More than that, he was determined. "I'll keep filming her." And he did. For nights afterward, Howard set the cameras to record while he pretended to sleep. He made sure she heard him snore, made sure she believed he was as oblivious as ever. And Laura, confident in the routine she had perfected for years, grew careless. Some nights she walked to the kitchen. Some nights she stretched her legs on the recliner, massaging her calves with practiced movements. Once, she sat at the dining table counting money from an envelope, humming to herself. She moved with the ease of someone who had forgotten she was supposed to be broken. Each recording tore another piece from Howard's heart. Emily watched beside him with tears she didn't bother to hide, anger simmering hotter every time they saw her mother glide through the house like a woman living a double life. Howard, meanwhile, felt his grief hardening into something steadier: resolve. Cole returned twice more, reviewing footage silently, his jaw tightening with each new clip. "This is enough to pursue warrants," he finally said. "Financial records, medical documentation, prior disability claims. Judge won't ignore this." Howard exhaled shakily. It was happening. The truth was no longer just a suspicion, it was a case. Cole stood, gathering the files. "Stay calm, don't confront her. We move carefully from here." As he left, the door shutting with a heavy thud, Howard felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The evidence was mounting, the lies were unraveling. And soon, very soon, the world Laura built would collapse under the truth she never thought he'd find. Howard had gotten better at pretending, better at keeping his face neutral, his voice calm, his movements steady, better at acting exactly the way he had for 6 years, the dutiful husband caring for his helpless wife. But inside, a storm raged that he barely contained. Laura sat in her recliner, flipping through a magazine she insisted he hold open for her. She sighed loudly, dramatically, the way she always did whenever she wanted his attention. "Howard," she said sharply, "you folded the laundry wrong. Again. It's not that complicated." He stopped mid-step, the insult landing like a slap. 6 years ago her tone would have hurt him. Now it infuriated him, because he knew with absolute certainty, that the hands pretending to lie limp in her lap were perfectly capable of folding their own clothes. The woman criticizing him was not helpless. She was not broken. She was not in pain. She was a liar, and he had loved her anyway. His throat tightened, and for a terrifying second he felt the dam inside him crack. Words surged up, ready to burst. I know you can walk. I know about the money. I know everything." He inhaled sharply, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. His knuckles blanched, his heartbeat hammered in his ears. Laura noticed the tension and raised a brow. "Is something wrong?" For a moment, just one, Howard almost told her, almost ended the act, almost let years of grief and betrayal spill into the room. But Detective Cole's voice echoed in his mind. "We need airtight evidence, Do not confront her, not yet. Howard forced his jaw to unclench. Nothing's wrong, he said quietly, just thinking. She shrugged, already bored. Well, think quietly. All your pacing distracts me. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not a fragile woman but a calculating one. A woman who had orchestrated her own false identity, who moved freely at night while playing the helpless victim by day. A woman who watched him work himself into chronic pain and never blinked. He swallowed the anger burning his throat and turned toward the kitchen, desperate to escape before his resolve snapped. Behind him, Laura called out casually, "You know, soon we'll have enough money to leave this old farmhouse." Howard froze mid-step. Slowly he turned back. "What do you mean, enough money?" She smiled faintly as if savoring the secret. "The next payment should go through in a month. After that, we won't need to stay here anymore. I'm tired of this place. I want somewhere nicer, warmer." Her eyes drifted dreamily. "Maybe by the ocean." Howard felt the blood drain from his face. Leave the farmhouse, leave him. Her words weren't a dream, they were a plan she didn't intend to include him in. A chair creaked softly behind him. Emily stood in the doorway. Why, having heard every word, her expression hardened into something fierce, protective, almost primal. "You're leaving?" Emily asked icily. "And you're using Dad to bankroll it?" Laura stiffened but quickly adopted her wounded expression. "I didn't mean it like that. I only meant that he deserves a break and—" "Stop," Emily snapped. "Just stop." Howard lifted a trembling hand, signaling Emily not to escalate. "It's all right," he murmured, though nothing inside him felt all right. His world was folding in on itself. Laura's deception wasn't a moment of desperation. It was a long-term strategy. He wasn't her husband, he was her income source, her workhorse, her shield. Her ticket out. Emily's eyes shone with fury. "Dad, you're not seriously letting her talk to you that way." But Howard had gone quiet, not defeated, focused. Every word Laura spoke was more proof, more fuel for the truth coming to light. Before Laura could respond, Howard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Dr. Min. His pulse quickened. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the hallway before Laura could object. He answered softly, "Doctor." Her voice was urgent. "Howard, I just reviewed some new information the police sent over. You need to hear this." He leaned against the wall. "What did they find?" "Discrepancies," she said. "Significant ones. Dates that don't match injury reports. Claims filed for treatment she never received. Forms signed while she was supposedly sedated." And her voice lowered. "Patterns indicating coordinated fraud." Howard closed his eyes, the hallway spinning slightly. "So it's real. Everything she told me, the whole thing." "Howard," Dr. Min said firmly, "this isn't just medical deception anymore. The police are preparing formal requests for documents. Detective Cole will contact you tonight." Howard nodded slowly, gripping the phone. "Thank you for telling me." As he hung up, the weight of the truth settled deeper onto his shoulders, no longer abstract, no longer a suspicion. It was happening. The investigation was moving forward. He breathed in shakily, steadying himself. Behind him, Laura's voice echoed from the living room. "Howard, are you talking about me?" He didn't answer, not yet. Because soon, very soon, the truth she'd hidden for 6 years would confront her instead. Detective Cole arrived just after dawn, his tone sharper now, his confidence solidified by the mounting evidence. He spread documents across the kitchen table, maps, schedules, a layout of the property, and a plan so precise it made Howard's stomach twist. This wasn't theory anymore. This was a sting. "We do this clean," Cole said. "No confrontation, no improvising. You leave the house exactly like we practiced. We watch what she does when she thinks she's alone." Howard nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. Emily sat beside him, steady, her jaw set with determination. They both understood. This was the moment everything turned. Cole continued, "Officers will be positioned behind the tree line and in an unmarked van down the road. The cameras inside will record her actions. We just need her to reveal the truth without knowing we're watching." Howard swallowed hard. "She'll slip. She always does when she thinks nobody can see." Cole gave him a reassuring nod. "Then this ends today." 20 minutes later, the plan was in motion. Howard approached the recliner where Laura lay draped in blankets, her expression pained, her voice soft with practiced helplessness. "Laura," he said gently, "I'm heading out for groceries. Won't be long." She offered a weak smile, placing a limp hand over his. "Be safe. You know I depend on you." Howard forced a nod, then turned away before she could notice the heartbreak flicker across his eyes. He stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. The moment it clicked shut, Cole, concealed with 2 officers behind the barn, lifted a hand signal. The unmarked van near the road aligned their cameras. Every angle of the house came online. Officers crouched low, hidden from every window view. And then they waited. 1 minute. 2. 3. Inside, Laura didn't move. 5 minutes. Cole whispered, "Any second now." And right on cue, the living room curtain rustled. Laura emerged from the recliner with fluid grace. No hesitation, no weakness, no hesitation of any kind. She stood tall, stretched her arms above her head, rolled her shoulders like a woman loosening stiff muscles after a nap. Howard watched from the surveillance tablet Cole held. The breath left his lungs in a quiet, sharp exhale. Even though he'd seen her move before, seeing her so bold, so carefree in daylight, it carved another wound through him. On screen, Laura walked to the mirror, fixing her hair, smoothing her blouse. Then she rehearsed something, hands gesturing, face shifting between fake sadness and measured dignity. Cole leaned closer. "Is she practicing?" They turned up the audio feed. "I just want what's fair, Laura," said to her reflection, voice trembling with practiced emotion. 6 years I've suffered, 6 years without independence. The payout is completely justified." Her expression changed abruptly to annoyance. "No, no, too dramatic," she muttered. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I've accepted my limitations, but they said they'd cover long-term support." She gestured as though speaking to insurance agents seated in front of her. "I deserve the full amount, after everything my husband and I have endured." She hardened her eyes, lowering her voice. "And if they deny me, well, I have recordings, I know my rights." Emily covered her mouth in disgust. Howard stared blankly, the betrayal hitting him anew. Then came the final blow. Laura picked up her phone, scrolling until she found a familiar contact, familiar to police, not to Howard. Her voice brightened. "Hey, baby," she whispered, tone playful, intimate. "He's gone now. Yes, yes, I'll have the money soon, and then we're out of here." Howard's knees weakened. His hand gripped the table behind him to stay standing. Laura laughed lightly. I know, he's clueless, completely clueless. I almost feel bad sometimes." She smirked. "Almost." Cole closed his eyes for a moment, jaw tightening. The officers nearby shifted, discomfort and anger passing silently between them. The recording captured every word. "And once the final check clears," Laura continued, "I'll tell him I want space or a separation or something. He won't fight back. He never does." Howard's heart twisted, but he remained silent. This wasn't the moment for emotion. This was the moment for truth and justice. Laura ended the call, humming as she walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, standing easily, balanced, strong, and leaned against the counter with a casual confidence that mocked every night Howard had carried her to bed. That was enough. Cole lowered the tablet, face set like stone. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "We have her," he said. "We have more than enough." He signaled to the officers, a firm, decisive nod. The plan's next phase would begin soon. Howard stared at the house he kept running for the woman he thought needed him, and realized the truth was no longer creeping forward. It was here, and everything Laura had built was about to fall. The sky was still bruised with night when the convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled quietly down the gravel road toward the Langley farmhouse. A thin layer of frost clung to the fields, shimmering under the faint hint of sunrise. Howard stood at the kitchen window, hands braced on the counter, watching the silhouettes approach. He felt hollow, not anxious, not angry, not relieved. Just emptied. 6 years had carved a canyon inside him, and this morning felt like the point of no return. Emily stood beside him, her hand wrapped around his arm. "Dad," she whispered, "you don't have to watch." But he did. He had to see the moment the lie finally cracked open. Detective Cole stepped out of the lead vehicle, nodding once to Howard through the window. It was exactly 6:00 a.m., the time they had chosen because Laura would still be pretending to sleep in the recliner. Officers fanned out with precision, moving into positions around the porch and back entrance. Cole knocked firmly. "Police, Laura Langley, we have a warrant." Inside, Laura jolted awake at the sound, or more accurately, she pretended to jolt awake. "Howard," she called weakly. "What's happening? I can't move, help me." Howard didn't move. Emily stepped closer, jaw set tight, refusing to give Laura even the smallest opportunity to manipulate her father again. Cole knocked a second time. Mrs. Langley opened the door. Laura whimpered, I can't, I'm paralyzed." Cole exchanged a look with an officer, then nodded. The door opened under a controlled entry, officers stepping in with calm authority. Laura, wrapped in her blanket like a fragile doll, stared at them with wide, trembling eyes. "Why are you here? I'm disabled. I can't, please don't touch me, I'm in pain." Her performance was flawless. But it didn't matter anymore. Cole approached slowly, his expression neutral but firm. "Mrs. Langley, please remain still. We have warrants for your arrest." She gasped dramatically. "Arrest for what? I can't even walk." Cole didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his folder and withdrew a tablet. "Mrs. Langley," he said, turning the screen toward her, "this is you. Recorded 3 nights ago." On the screen, Laura appeared in full, crisp clarity, rising effortlessly from the recliner, stretching her arms, walking to the kitchen with a confident stride. She was strong, steady, entirely uninjured. Every ounce of color drained from her face. Her breathing hitched, then stuttered, as if she were trying to decide whether to stick with the act or abandon it entirely. Her fingers twitched, something she never allowed when she pretended paralysis. Her eyes darted between the footage and Howard, who still stood silently in the doorway, watching her without expression. "Laura Langley," Cole said, his voice now formal, "you are under arrest for disability fraud, falsification of medical records, and insurance theft." The words shattered whatever composure she had left. "No, no, this is a mistake," she cried. "Howard, tell them I can't walk. Tell them you've taken care of me for years. They're lying, they're trying to ruin me." Howard didn't speak. His silence became the loudest truth in the room. Laura's voice cracked as she turned to Emily instead. "Emily, please, sweetheart. You know I've suffered, help me." Emily stepped in front of her father, her eyes cold. "I know you lied," she said quietly. "I know you drained him, used him, broke him. You don't get to call this suffering." The officers moved closer. Laura flinched. "No, don't touch me, I'm paralyzed." But the performance fell apart as soon as physical contact was imminent. She jerked away reflexively, an instinct impossible for someone without motor control. The officers saw it. Cole saw it. Howard saw it. There was no pretending left. 2 officers lifted her gently but firmly to her feet. She stood. She stood. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't bother hiding it. "Howard," she screamed as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, "you betrayed me. After everything I endured for you, this is how you repay me." He still didn't speak, not a word. His face remained calm, too calm. Not anger, not victory, not satisfaction. Just devastation. Emily wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close as Laura struggled against the officers. "Dad, it's over," she murmured. "It's finally over." But Laura wasn't done. As they led her toward the door, she twisted her head back, her voice shrill and wild. "You think you're rid of me. This isn't over, I'll—" Her words were cut off as the officers guided her outside, her protests echoing into the cold morning air. And when the door closed, the farmhouse fell silent. Howard remained motionless for several seconds, staring at the empty recliner, the one he had pushed, cleaned, and tended to for years. It looked smaller now, deceitfully innocent. Emily squeezed his hand. But Howard didn't look away from the recliner. Because this morning wasn't an ending. It was the first moment. He finally understood how deeply he had been wounded, and how long it might take to heal. The days after the arrest passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and police interviews. Howard found himself drifting through the farmhouse like a ghost, surrounded by medical equipment that suddenly felt theatrical, props from a play he hadn't realized he was cast into. But the true unraveling began when Detective Cole called him back to the station. "We've uncovered more," Cole said as he guided Howard into a quiet conference room. Emily joined them, her hand resting protectively on her father's shoulder. Cole spread folders across the table, documents, emails, bank statements, screenshots, each one another blade in a truth that felt too large to absorb. "We now believe," Cole began, "that Laura staged the fall." Howard's breath caught. "Staged." Cole nodded grimly, "and she didn't do it alone." He slid a photo forward, a grainy surveillance shot of a man entering a motel, middle-aged, familiar in a way Howard didn't want to acknowledge. "Richard Hale," Cole said, "your wife's former boyfriend, the one she supposedly cut ties with decades ago." Howard felt something in him collapse quietly, painfully. He remembered Laura mentioning Richard once, calling him a mistake, a chapter she was glad to leave behind. But the truth was here in front of him, undeniable. Cole continued, "We recovered emails between them going back at least 7 years. They discussed the plan in detail, how to stage the accident, how to prolong her condition, and how to make you the primary caregiver to support her narrative." Emily gasped, covering her mouth. Howard stared at the table, focusing on the grain of the wood so he didn't fall apart. Cole pushed another document forward, an email printed in stark black ink. "She wrote this to Richard 2 months after the fall," he said gently. Howard hesitated, then read the lines. "He's predictable, soft-hearted, too loyal for his own good, useful." The word landed like a punch to the ribs. Useful. Not loved. Not valued. Not appreciated. Useful. He gripped the edges of the paper to keep his hands from shaking. Every back rub he gave her, every meal he cooked, every night he woke up to adjust her pillows, none of it had been received with gratitude. Every whispered thank you had been nothing but calculation, skillful manipulation, a performance designed to keep him obedient and devoted. Emily's eyes filled with angry tears. "Dad, she never deserved you, not for 1 minute." Howard tried to speak, but the emotion lodged in his throat. He had sacrificed 6 years, years he could never get back. Years of physical pain, of self-denial, of guilt she poured over him like hot tar. And all the while, she and Richard had collected insurance payouts and made long-term plans to run away together once the money reached a certain threshold. Cole continued with quiet professionalism. "The community will hear about this once charges finalize. We've already had several neighbors calling, shocked. People saw your devotion. They never imagined something like this." Howard took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it all pressed down. He never cared much about what the community thought, but somehow hearing that others were stunned made the betrayal feel broader, deeper, like his entire world had tilted off its axis. After the meeting, when Emily drove him home, the farmhouse felt strangely unfamiliar, like someone else's home, someone else's life. He sat in the living room, staring at the empty recliner that had anchored his days for so long. The quiet was deafening. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. "Mr. Langley." The voice was gentle, familiar. "Dr. Min," he said, surprised. "I heard the latest updates from Detective Cole," she said. "I wanted to check on you. This kind of betrayal is life-changing. No one should have to carry that alone." Howard exhaled shakily. "I'm managing." "That's something people say when they aren't," she replied softly. A silence passed, steady, comforting, respectful. Dr. Min was one of the few people who had seen through the lie, the first person to look at Laura and see what no one else had seen, the one who gave Howard the first warning before the entire world shifted beneath him. He swallowed. "Doctor, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." But Howard shook his head, even though she couldn't see it. "No, you saved my life. If you hadn't said something, I might have spent another 6 years believing her, maybe more." His voice thickened. "I don't know what would have happened to me." Dr. Min's voice softened further. "You listened when it mattered. That takes strength, Howard." When the call ended, Howard remained seated, staring at the floor as tears finally escaped. Quiet, worn, exhausted tears. Not for the woman he lost, but for the years he had surrendered without knowing. Outside, the wind swept across the fields, rattling the farmhouse walls gently. It felt like the world was shifting again, this time not with betrayal, but with the fragile promise of healing. And tomorrow, the investigation would continue. But tonight, Howard finally let himself breathe. Howard sat in attorney Paul Whitman's office, hands folded tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet. The room was warm, lined with dark wooden shelves and old legal books, but he felt cold, like he'd stepped into a version of his life he never expected to face. Paul paced slowly in front of him, holding a yellow notepad marked with questions and bullet points. "Howard," Paul said, stopping in front of him, "when you're on the stand, you answer clearly, just the facts. No apologizing, no downplaying what you went through." Howard nodded, though his voice didn't come. He felt small, diminished. I don't want to sound like a fool." Paul lowered himself into the chair opposite him. "You're not a fool." But Howard's eyes dropped. "I believed everything she told me. 6 years, 6 whole years." His voice cracked under the weight of his own self-blame. "How did I not see it? How did I not question a single thing?" Emily, who had been sitting beside him, reached over and took his hand. "Dad, you believed her because you loved her, because you're compassionate. That's not stupidity. That's integrity." Her tone sharpened. "She used your goodness against you. That's on her, not you." Howard closed his eyes, letting her words anchor him, just enough to stay upright. A knock sounded at the door, and Detective Cole stepped in, holding a folder thick with documents. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we need to go over the formal charges before tomorrow." Paul gestured for him to join. Cole sat, opening the folder with a crisp snap. "Laura Langley is being charged with multiple counts: disability fraud, insurance fraud, falsification of medical documents, and conspiracy to commit financial deceit." He paused, then added with grim emphasis, "And because she exploited your age and physical condition to maintain the deception, the state is adding an elder exploitation charge." Howard's chest tightened. Elder exploitation. He never imagined he would be placed in that category, someone vulnerable enough to be preyed upon. It stung deeper than the other charges. Cole continued. "Her boyfriend, Richard Hale, will face conspiracy and financial charges as well." Paul nodded. "The case is strong. The footage, the emails, the staged fall, all of it paints a clear picture." Emily crossed her arms. "So what's their defense? Lisa, Laura's attorney, what's she planning? Cole exhaled through his nose, frustration flickering across his features. They're trying a countermeasure. They're claiming Laura was emotionally and physically abused by Howard. The room froze. Howard's eyes widened. What? Paul shook his head immediately. It's a desperate move. They're trying to paint her deception as self-protection rather than fraud. Emily slammed her hand on the chair arm. That's disgusting. Dad took care of her every day. He practically destroyed his back doing it. Cole nodded. We know, but we have to be prepared. Laura's attorney will claim she acted out of fear, that she pretended paralysis to escape your supposed aggression. Howard leaned forward, voice trembling. Aggression? I never even raised my voice at her, not once. I know, Cole said, his tone softening. But lies don't stop just because someone is caught. They often get worse. Paul pulled out a remote and pointed it at the TV screen mounted on his wall. Fortunately, he said, we have the truth. The footage appeared, Laura rising from the recliner, stretching, walking with total control. Then her practicing emotional speeches. Then the phone call to Richard. Then the financial documents showing her signatures, her transfers, her planning. No jury in the country could mistake any of this for fear. Paul muted the screen and turned back to Howard. This footage doesn't only disprove her claims, it dismantles every pillar of their defense. Howard watched his former life play out on the screen, frame by frame. Each clip hurt, but each clip also strengthened him. Paul closed his notepad. Tomorrow, when you take the stand, you speak the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. That's all you've ever done. Emily squeezed her father's hand again. Dad, you're not walking into that courtroom as a victim. You're walking in as someone who survived 6 years of manipulation and didn't let it destroy you. Howard took a slow, shaky breath. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt something stir beneath the grief, a kind of quiet resolve. He looked at Paul, then at Cole, then at his daughter. I'm ready, he said softly. Cole gave a single approving nod. Then tomorrow we end this. As Howard stood, gathering his coat, the weight of the upcoming confrontation pressed against him. But so did a fragile strength he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow he would face Laura. Not as the man she manipulated. Not as the caregiver she drained. But as the man who finally saw her clearly. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air, an odd mixture of formality and finality. Howard sat at the plaintiff's table beside Paul Whitman, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Emily sat directly behind him for support, her presence steady and unwavering. Howard stared straight ahead, breathing deeply, preparing himself for what he knew would be one of the hardest moments of his life. Then the doors opened. Laura entered dramatically, pushed by an assistant in a wheelchair she no longer had any right to use. Her blanket was folded perfectly over her legs, her shoulders hunched, her face contorted into practiced fragility. She looked around the court. Room with eyes wide and wounded, as though she were the victim in all this. Howard felt his stomach twist. The bailiff announced her name, but Laura interrupted with a soft sob. I can't move on my own, she whimpered. I need help. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, tapped her gavel once. Mrs. Langley, she said sharply, we have documented evidence of your ability to walk. I will warn you now, any attempt to fake paralysis again will be treated as contempt. A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Laura froze. Her hands curled slightly around the armrests, but otherwise she stayed in character, still pretending, still clinging to the lie even as it crumbled beneath her. The prosecution began with precision. Your Honor, the lead prosecutor said, stepping forward, we will begin by presenting video evidence obtained by law enforcement with warrants properly issued. The lights dimmed, a monitor flicked on. And there she was. Laura at 12:14 a.m., rising smoothly from the same wheelchair she had just used to enter the courtroom. She stretched, rolled her shoulders, walked freely to the kitchen, drank water, practiced fraudulent speeches. Howard didn't blink. He'd seen this video many times, but seeing it in a courtroom, seeing the jurors' eyes widen, seeing the attorneys lean forward, seeing strangers react in shock, made the betrayal feel newly sharp. Laura's composure cracked. "That's taken out of context," she burst out. I was having an involuntary reaction, a spasm." The prosecutor paused the footage strategically, showing her mid-stride, perfectly balanced. "A spasm, Mrs. Langley. You walked 21 steps without assistance." Laura's lips trembled. She cast a frantic glance toward her attorney, but he was already sinking in his seat, knowing the defense strategy had been obliterated. The prosecutor pressed a button again. The next clip played, Laura on the phone with Richard, laughing, calling Howard clueless, saying she'd leave him when the payout came through. Gasps erupted across the courtroom, louder this time. A couple in the back row exchanged horrified looks. A woman covered her mouth. Laura squirmed in her wheelchair, then, without thinking, stood up. She stood. Instinctively, easily, without pain, without hesitation. The entire courtroom went silent. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "Mrs. Langley, I strongly suggest you sit back down unless you wish to add perjury to your list of charges." Realizing what she'd done, Laura collapsed back into the chair, trying to force her legs into an unnatural stillness. But it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Howard felt a wave of emotions rise in him. Not triumph, not anger, just profound sorrow. He remembered carrying her, believing she was helpless, believing love meant sacrifice. He remembered whispering reassurances while she counted money behind his back. And now she sat there, exposed under courtroom lights, stripped of every manipulation she once wielded. "Mr. Langley," the judge said, "please take the stand." Howard stood, steady despite the tremor in his knees, and walked toward the witness chair. As he passed Laura, she whispered urgently, "Howard, please help me. You know I needed you." He didn't look at her. Under oath, he spoke plainly, slowly, without embellishment. He described the 6 years of care, the lifting, the bathing, the late nights where he cried from exhaustion. He described the guilt she weaponized, the fear she instilled, the devotion he offered wholeheartedly. His voice never rose. He never accused her cruelly. He simply told the truth, one painful sentence at a time. When he finished, the courtroom remained still. Even the judge took a quiet moment before speaking. "Thank you, Mr. Langley." Laura's attorney made one last futile objection, but the judge cut him off. "Spare the court," she said flatly. "The evidence speaks for itself." She turned to the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The room tightened, holding a collective breath. "We find the defendant, Laura Langley, guilty on all counts." Laura's face twisted, a mix of fury and desperation. "Howard," she screamed as the bailiff approached, "how could you do this to me, after everything I sacrificed?" But her voice faded as she was handcuffed and led away. Howard didn't watch her go. He simply exhaled, a long, quiet release of 6 years of weight. And though the verdict was final, he knew the emotional reckoning wasn't over. Not yet. Sentencing day arrived with a heavy stillness that seemed to seep into every hallway of the courthouse. Howard stood quietly beside Paul Whitman as they waited for proceedings to begin. The courtroom was fuller than before, neighbors, reporters, familiar faces from town, all drawn by the shocking unraveling of the 6-year deception. Howard felt their eyes drift toward him every so often, not with judgment, but with something gentler, understanding, sympathy. High, maybe even admiration, but he didn't bask in it, he barely felt it. The doors opened. Laura entered in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, guided by 2 deputies. She walked this time. No wheelchair, no limp, no trembling weakness. just the hardened stare of someone who realized the world no longer revolved around her lies. Richard Hale followed shortly afterward, shackled, his expression defiant and sour. They avoided looking at each other, but the tension between them hummed like a frayed wire. Judge Reynolds took her seat. "We are here to deliver sentencing for Laura Langley and Richard Hale on counts of fraud, conspiracy, falsification of medical documents, disability theft, and elder exploitation." Howard didn't breathe for a moment. Hearing the words spoken aloud made the last 6 years feel brutally real all over again. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state recommends the maximum penalty. The harm inflicted was long-term, deliberate, and deeply personal. Mr. Langley was exploited physically, financially, and emotionally. The evidence shows the defendants planned not just to profit from deception, but to discard him once they were finished." Laura's jaw tightened. Richard glared at the prosecutor. Judge Reynolds nodded, flipping through pages of notes. "Mrs. Langley, please rise." Laura stood stiffly, her chin raised. "This court finds your actions calculated and cruel," the judge began. "For 6 years, you sustained a deception that drained your husband's health, finances, and spirit. You manipulated medical professionals, exploited public resources, and conspired with another individual to siphon money under false pretenses." Laura's composure flickered, but she held on to her mask of defiance. "For your crimes," the judge continued, "you are sentenced to 14 years in state prison, without the possibility of parole until you have served at least 10. A soft gasp traveled through the courtroom. Laura's mouth dropped open. 14 years. You can't be serious. He wanted to take care of me. I didn't force him." "Sit down," the judge ordered. "Now." Laura sank into her chair, shaking, not from fear, but from losing control of the narrative she had built. Judge Reynolds turned to Richard. "Mr. Hale, you entered a conspiracy that enabled and encouraged fraud, financial theft, and emotional abuse. You are sentenced to 9 years in prison." Richard swore under his breath as deputies tightened the cuffs. Howard stared down at his hands, gripping the edge of the bench. 14 years. 9 years. Justice. But justice didn't erase the memories of the nights he stayed up tending to her, or the guilt she planted so deeply inside him that he could still feel its roots even now. Relief washed over him, but it came mixed with grief, confusion, even mourning. Not for the woman Laura truly was, but for the version he thought he had married. The version he cared for. The version that never existed. Emily slid closer and wrapped her hand around his. His fingers trembled, she squeezed tighter. "Dad," she whispered, "you're okay, you're safe now." Judge Reynolds looked toward Howard. "Mr. Langley," she said warmly, "your resilience in the face of prolonged deception is admirable. Many would not have survived such emotional and physical strain. This court acknowledges not just the harm you endured, but the extraordinary patience and compassion you displayed despite it." Howard blinked hard. Her words washed over him like someone finally lifting a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying on his spine. When proceedings ended, people approached him as they exited the courtroom. "Howard, we're so sorry. No one could have known. You did everything a good man would do." For the first time, he didn't shrink under the sympathy. He accepted it, not with pride but with quiet relief. The shame he carried had been replaced, piece by piece, by truth, and that truth was louder than the lies he once lived under. Later that night, back at the farmhouse, he stood in his bedroom doorway for a long time before climbing into bed. The house, once oppressive with tension, felt strangely lighter. The recliner in the living room remained empty, but it no longer haunted him. The silence no longer felt like accusation. Emily stayed until he finally lay down. She kissed his forehead gently, the way he used to do for her when she was little. "Get some rest," she whispered. "You deserve it." Howard closed his eyes. And for the first time in 6 years, he slept. truly slept. No guilt, no fear, no weight, just peace. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, uneven steps, steps almost as unfamiliar to Howard as the truth he now lived with. The first step began in a modest physical therapy clinic on the outskirts of town, where sunlight filtered through tall windows and the quiet clatter of machines echoed across the room. Howard sat on the padded table, shoulders stiff, back aching in a way he had learned to ignore. Or 6 long years. The therapist, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a patient tone, placed a firm but gentle hand on his spine. "This kind of strain doesn't happen overnight," he said. "Your muscles have been compensating for too much for too long, but we'll rebuild, slowly." Howard nodded, though embarrassment still lingered. It felt odd to be the one receiving care after so long being the caregiver. But with each stretch, each careful exercise, he felt a little less guilt, a little more permission to heal. A few days into therapy, his phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Min. "Checking in on you. Let me know if you need support." He called her back later that afternoon. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said gently. "Trauma like yours doesn't disappear after a verdict. I'd like to connect you with a counselor who specializes in long-term caretaking distress, someone who understands emotional manipulation." Howard hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about himself, wasn't used to admitting the emotional toll. But after a long breath he said, "Yes, I think I need that." Dr. Min's voice softened. "I'll arrange it." Meanwhile, the farmhouse, once a place suffocating with reminders of Laura's lie, began to transform. Emily arrived every morning with gloves, garbage bags, and a fierce determination to reclaim the home for her father. "Dad, this stuff has to go," she said as she wheeled out the portable lift they no longer needed. "It's not your burden anymore." Howard watched her dismantle the medical bed, unplug monitors, box up pill organizers, each item a reminder of years spent serving a fiction. He helped where he could, though sometimes he froze mid-task, his hands hovering over an object he'd used daily for years. Like the feeding tray, the heating pad, the medicine chart. Every object held a memory, none real but all deeply felt. One afternoon, as Emily boxed up one last drawer of supplies, Howard found himself walking toward the living room out of sheer instinct. He paused beside the empty recliner, his hand reaching unconsciously to adjust a blanket that wasn't there. He caught himself, breath hitching. Emily watched from the doorway, heart breaking for him. "Dad, it's all right." But Howard shook his head, overwhelmed. "For 6 years I woke up every morning thinking she needed me. My whole day was built around that idea." His voice thinned. "I keep thinking she's going to call my name." He lowered himself onto the recliner's edge, burying his face in his hands. The grief wasn't for Laura, not the real Laura, but for the years he gave away, the years he sacrificed, the years he cannot reclaim. Emily knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back as his shoulders shook. "You didn't lose those years," she whispered. "You lived with honor. She didn't take that from you." Howard cried quietly, finally allowing himself the release he'd been holding back since the first hint of betrayal weeks ago. And strangely, the house felt lighter after. News of the sentencing spread quickly through their rural community. Neighbors who once saw him tending to Laura with quiet devotion now arrived with casseroles, homemade pies, and awkward but heartfelt embraces. "Howard, we had no idea," Mrs. Weaver said, placing a warm casserole on the counter. "You're stronger than any of us realized." Tom Weaver, the neighbor who finally confessed what he'd seen the night of the staged fall, stopped by too. He removed his cap, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. Should have trusted what I saw." Howard shook his hand firmly. "You told me when it mattered." Evenings became quieter, peaceful, not lonely. Howard found himself sitting on the porch with Emily, watching the sky turn gold, then purple, then deep blue. He breathed easier now, not fully healed, not fully whole, but no longer trapped. At night, he still woke occasionally, startled by phantom responsibilities. He would sit up, heart pounding, expecting to hear Laura call for him. But each time, the silence reminded him gently. She was gone, and he was free. As the farmhouse shed its false identity piece by piece, Howard began to see his life again, not the one shaped by lies, but the one waiting beneath them. And for the first time, the future didn't feel impossible. It felt possible. Incredibly, quietly possible. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot with the soft hiss of paper against wood. Howard didn't notice it at first. He was sanding a small piece of oak in his workshop, letting the gentle rhythm of the work soothe his mind. It was Emily who found the envelope on the floor. "Dad," she called gently, this is from the state correctional facility." Howard froze. For a long moment he didn't turn around. His hand stayed on the block of wood, sanding unconsciously, as if movement could protect him from whatever words waited inside that envelope. When he finally did turn, Emily was holding it carefully, her expression pulled tight with worry. He wiped his hands on an old rag and took the letter without a word. It felt heavier than it should have. He walked into the living room, the letter trembling slightly in his grip. Emily followed, hovering close in case he faltered. Howard sat in his old armchair, the one he had chosen for himself only after clearing Laura's medical equipment, then slid a finger beneath the seal. The paper unfolded like a confession, waiting for breath. "Howard, I know you'll hate me for writing. I know you probably won't even finish reading this. But please try to understand. What I did wasn't cruelty. It was desperation." Howard exhaled slowly. Desperation. Even now she couldn't call it what it was. He continued reading. "You don't know what it felt like to be trapped in this life. I felt invisible. I felt unwanted. I was aging, losing my beauty, losing control. Richard made me feel alive again. I didn't plan for things to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you." Howard's jaw tightened. She always apologized by circling back to herself. "I know you think I used you, but there were moments I truly loved you, deeply. You were good to me in ways no one else ever was. Maybe that's why I pushed things too far. I was afraid of losing the comfort you gave me, the stability. You were safe." Howard paused, the words blurred. Safe, comfort, stability. She had loved what he provided, not him. The letter went on. "You have every right to hate me. I understand that now, but I hope one day you'll see me as more than a monster. I'm human. I made mistakes. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could keep everything together, but everything spiraled out of control." She ended with a final blow. "I hope you remember me not as the woman in handcuffs, but as the woman who once stood beside you at the altar, promising forever. I meant it then. I did. Laura." Howard folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases into place with trembling fingers. He stared at it for a long moment, as if the paper might change if he looked long enough. Emily approached quietly. "Dad, what did she say?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply handed her the letter. Emily read it quickly, her expression darkening with each paragraph. When she finished, she let out a breath full of frustration and disbelief. "Dad, don't let this get into your head," she said firmly. She's still manipulating, even now, blaming desperation instead of admitting cruelty, saying she once loved you so you'll feel guilty again. She knows exactly what strings to pull. Howard nodded slowly, though his eyes remained on the folded letter in his hands. "I know," he whispered. "I know what she's doing." "Then don't let her hook you again," Emily urged, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "She doesn't get that power anymore." Howard's gaze drifted to the fireplace. The embers from last night still glowed faintly, waiting to be stirred back to life. He stood, moving almost instinctively, and walked toward it. Emily didn't try to stop him. He knelt beside the hearth, feeling the warmth against his face. Carefully, deliberately, he held the letter above the quiet flames. For a second, he hesitated, not because he doubted the decision, but because he needed the moment to mean something. Then he released it. The paper curled quickly, edges darkening, words turning to ash before they could cling to him any longer. The flames consumed the apology, the excuses, the twisted declarations of love. When the last ember of the letter flickered out, Howard let out a long, steady breath, one that seemed to lift a weight from deep within his chest. He whispered into the crackling quiet, voice low but resolute. "I gave you everything." He closed his eyes. "You gave me a lie." Emily knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him gently. Howard leaned into her, not broken, but finally letting go. The fire glowed softly, no longer a place of burning anger but of cleansing, of closure. And tomorrow, for the first time, he could move forward without looking back. Howard never expected to step foot inside a rehabilitation center again, not after everything he had experienced. But this time, he walked through the double doors with steady steps and a quiet sense of choice. Not obligation, not guilt, just purpose. The director, a warm woman named Sharon, shook his hand firmly. "We're grateful to have you, Howard. People listen to someone who's lived through pain, not just tended to it." He nodded modestly, but her words landed somewhere deep. For years, he had been the silent caretaker in the shadows. Now, he was here not to lift bodies or push wheelchairs, but to share something harder to quantify, empathy carved from experience. He joined a small circle in the common room, where patients in various stages of recovery gathered, some learning to walk again, some adjusting to new medical realities, some simply acclimating to a life they hadn't planned. Howard listened as they spoke. There were no theatrics, no manipulation, just raw, honest struggles. A young man named Blake described the frustration of relearning balance. An older woman spoke about losing independence but gaining gratitude. A teenager recovering from a car accident confessed she felt guilty needing help from her parents. Howard found himself leaning in, offering gentle encouragement. "You're not a burden," he told her softly. "You're healing. That takes courage." She smiled weakly, and somehow, Howard felt something inside him click back into place, something he thought Laura's betrayal had shattered permanently. Faith. Not just in others, but in the idea that truth, vulnerability, and pain could coexist without manipulation. After the session ended, Dr. Min appeared in the doorway, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She wore the same steady expression he'd come to trust. "I heard you were starting today," she said. Howard chuckled lightly. "Word gets around." "Especially good word." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I wanted to say I'm proud of you. Most people would shut down after what you lived through, but you're rebuilding. That takes resilience." Howard met her eyes, feeling the sincerity behind the compliment. "You gave me the first reason to believe I wasn't crazy," he said. "You deserve some credit." Dr. Min smiled softly. "You did the hardest part, Howard. You listened to the truth. Most can't do that." Before he could respond, she was called away by a nurse, but the warmth of her words lingered long after she'd gone. When Howard returned home that afternoon, the aroma of garlic, rosemary, and butter drifted through the farmhouse. Emily was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pan with practiced ease. "What's all this?" Howard asked. She grinned. "A surprise. You haven't had a proper home-cooked dinner in years. Mom never let you eat anything except bland stuff while she demanded gourmet meals for herself." Howard laughed, an honest, full laugh that felt strange in his chest, as if his ribs weren't used to the expansion. "I think I could get used to this." They sat at the kitchen table, just father and daughter, sharing a meal that tasted like comfort and new beginnings. No tension, no guilt, No manipulation creeping in from the next room, just peace. Later that week, while cleaning out the storage shed, Howard stumbled across his old woodworking tools, covered in dust but still intact. He picked up a chisel, feeling the familiar weight against his palm. The smell of sawdust lingered faintly, like a memory calling him home. Without thinking, he set up a small workbench, cut a piece of maple, began carving. The rhythm soothed him immediately. The scrape of steel against wood, the curl of shavings falling to the floor, it grounded him more than any therapy session could. For hours, he lost himself in the craft he abandoned years ago when every waking moment belonged to Laura's demands. By the time he stopped, he had carved the beginnings of a small bird, simple, delicate, full of quiet life. A few days later, Detective Cole visited the farmhouse carrying a folder. "Good news," he said as he stepped inside. "The restitution is finalized." Howard exhaled slowly. The funds wouldn't erase the past, but they would help rebuild the years he'd lost. Cole explained the details: compensation from insurance, recovery of stolen funds, penalties imposed on Laura and Richard. When he finished, he placed a reassuring hand on Howard's shoulder. "You can start fresh now, truly fresh." Start fresh. The words echoed in Howard's mind long after Cole left. That evening, Howard sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the field stretching green and endless before him. For the first time in years, he wasn't bracing for a cry for help or a demand from the next room. He wasn't waiting for chaos. He wasn't living inside someone else's script. He was planning a retirement he actually chose. He didn't know yet whether he would travel, volunteer more, or simply build wooden birds in his shed. But the possibilities felt wide enough to breathe in. And as the sun dipped behind the fields, painting the horizon gold, Howard realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning again. The farmhouse felt different the morning Howard decided it was time to open the windows, truly open them, not just crack them for a moment of air. For 6 years, the curtains had stayed drawn, the glass smudged, the latches untouched. Laura hated drafts. She said they made her legs ache, made her pain worse, made her feel vulnerable. And Howard, obedient, devoted, guilt-ridden, always kept the house sealed tight. But today, the house would breathe again. He walked to the living room window first. His fingers hesitated on the latch before he pushed it upward. The old frame groaned, then gave way, letting in a rush of bright, honest spring air. It swept through the room, touching corners long untouched, stirring dust motes into soft spirals of gold. Howard closed his eyes. It felt like exhaling after years of holding breath. Emily joined him, carrying a can of soft cream-colored paint. "I thought we could start with the medical room," she said gently, "if you're ready." He nodded. "I think I am." They walked down the hallway together. The door to the room, once Laura's makeshift infirmary, stood half open. Inside, the empty space felt hollow and strange, like a stage stripped of props. The bed was gone. The hoists and rails were gone. The pill organizers and monitoring devices gone. Only the imprint of the past lingered, lightly pressed into the walls and the carpet. Howard paused at the threshold. Memories flickered. The endless nights adjusting pillows, the rehearsed cries of discomfort, the quiet resentment she used as a weapon. But those memories no longer had teeth. They could no longer bite. "Let's change it," he said. Emily opened the windows wide. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating the room with a warm, forgiving glow. Howard spread out drop cloths while Emily stirred the paint. Together they rolled new color over the walls, erasing the muted medical gray with soft cream, brightening the corners that once felt suffocating. With every stroke of the roller, Howard felt something loosen in his chest. This room was no longer a shrine to a lie. It was becoming something new, something light. They dragged in a small love seat, a wicker chair, and a table Howard refinished in his workshop. Potted plants from local neighbors filled the windowsill, fern, aloe, a small lemon tree someone insisted would thrive in the sun. By afternoon, the old medical room had transformed into a sunroom. A place to sit, to breathe, to live. When they stepped back to admire it, Emily smiled softly. It looks like a home again. Howard nodded, his throat tight. Feels like one too. Over the next week, Howard continued opening windows, everyone in the farmhouse. Warm breezes traveled through the halls, carrying out the stale heaviness that had settled there over the years. Curtains fluttered freely for the first time in forever. The house creaked differently now, almost gratefully, as if stretching after a long, uncomfortable sleep. And for the first time in years, Howard invited people inside. Neighbors who once admired him from a distance now came carrying pies, flowers, and gentle conversation. They filled the farmhouse with laughter and recollections, offering warmth without pity. Tom Weaver sat at the kitchen table one evening, sipping coffee and apologizing again for not speaking up sooner. "You don't need to keep saying sorry," Howard told him. "You helped when it mattered." As the house filled with voices, Howard breathed easily. The sound didn't overwhelm him. It didn't remind him of years spent tiptoeing around someone else's fragility. It felt like reclaiming something essential. But the quiet afterward was even more meaningful. One night after Emily left and the house settled, Howard stood alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked softly. The wind rustled the trees outside. The silence wrapped around him, not heavy this time, not threatening, just quiet, a peaceful quiet he hadn't known he craved. He realized with a small smile that he didn't flinch anymore. He didn't brace for a call from the other room, didn't wait for an accusation or a plea. Silence had turned from a trigger into a comfort. The farmhouse had finally shifted from a place of duty to a place of belonging. His belonging. He walked into the new sunroom, sinking into the wicker chair. Warm evening light spilled across the floor, touching the plants gently. Howard leaned back, letting the breeze wash over him, smelling faintly of cut grass and distant rain. Healing, he realized, wasn't just something people said. It wasn't metaphorical or theoretical. It was this: opening windows, repainting walls, inviting neighbors, breathing quietly in a room that once suffocated him. He closed his eyes, letting the moment settle deeply inside him. Healing had become real. Howard didn't usually buy flowers. For most of his life, he'd picked them from the fields, simple wildflowers gathered into rough little bundles. But today, standing in the bright, polished lobby of the county hospital, he held a carefully arranged bouquet, sunflowers, white lilies, and soft greenery threaded together. Something warm, something grateful. He spotted Dr. Min through a glass window, reviewing charts with the same focused intensity she had shown the day she first said the words that changed everything. "Call the police." When she turned and saw him, her expression softened in surprise. "Howard, you didn't have to come all the way here." He stepped forward, offering the bouquet with both hands. "I did," he said quietly, "and these are for you." She blinked, taken aback, then accepted them gently, lifting them toward her chest. "They're beautiful." "You deserve more than flowers," Howard murmured. "You saw what I couldn't. Why?" "Oh, weren't fooled, not for a second. And you told me the truth even when you knew it would break me." He swallowed. "That took bravery." But Dr. Min shook her head. "Howard, you give me too much credit. I found inconsistencies, yes, but a lot of doctors ignore their instincts. You listened when it mattered. You saved yourself by listening." He held her gaze for a long moment, letting those words settle inside him. He'd spent months feeling like a man who survived a storm he should have seen coming, blaming himself for not recognizing a lie wearing the mask of love. But when she said it, "You saved yourself," the shame he once carried loosened another notch. She touched his arm lightly. "I'm glad you're doing better." He nodded. "Better than I thought I ever could be." After leaving the hospital, Howard drove slowly back to the farmhouse. The windows were all open again today, sunlight pouring through and carrying the gentle scents of early summer across the floors. His new sunroom glowed softly as he passed by, but he didn't stop there. Instead, he walked out back, toward the garden. The one Laura used to claim she adored but rarely tended. Howard knelt near the edge where the old lavender bush was beginning to bloom again. Its soft, purple buds brushed against his fingertips. He sat in the grass, letting the memories come without flinching this time. He remembered planting these rows for her, remembered weeding the soil alone while she watched from the porch, pretending she couldn't help. He remembered cooking, cleaning, lifting, bathing, duties he once saw as love, not as leverage. But now, kneeling in the sunlight, he realized something important. He hadn't been loyal to a woman. He had been loyal to a belief in commitment, in compassion, in vows he took seriously. His loyalty hadn't been misplaced. Hers had. A breeze lifted the scent of lavender around him, soft and calm. For the first time, the garden didn't remind him of lies. It reminded him of what he'd learned, what he'd lost, and what he'd reclaimed. He no longer felt guilt, no longer felt shame, only clarity. And clarity felt like a clean, warm morning after a long, violent storm. Footsteps crunched softly behind him. Emily sat down beside him without speaking at first. She rested her head against his shoulder, the way she had when she was small. Her arms wrapped around him from the side, gentle but full of certainty. "Dad," she whispered, "you got your life back." Howard let out a breath that felt full, steady, and free. "Yeah," he murmured, "I did." He looked across the fields, golden, open, wide, and felt the weight of 6 years finally slide off his shoulders, not with a dramatic collapse but with a quiet acceptance. For months, he'd been trying to outrun the memories, trying to make sense of betrayal, trying to stitch together the parts of himself Laura had worn down. But today, sitting in the garden with sunlight on his face and his daughter's arms around him, he didn't need to run anymore. He had arrived. At peace. At truth. At himself. Emily squeezed him gently, sensing the shift inside him. "You okay?" Howard nodded, for the first time truly yes. He stood slowly brushing soil from his hands and looked back at the farmhouse. His farmhouse, alive again, breathing again, his again. The nightmare was over. He knew it in his bones. And as he turned toward the door, ready to step into the home he had finally reclaimed, he spoke the words that defined everything he had survived. "I cared for a lie, but finding the truth gave me back the man I used to be."